Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing part 154 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take some of a look at the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got quite a lot of birds, we all love our birds, quite a few macaws, a couple other birds, and a duck, we love our ducks. And we've got also a couple mammals, including an extinct one, as you probably saw on the thumbnail. So I'm not going to waste your time too much. We're going to get right into it. So Lorby has first created these first few birds. So we're going to be starting off with the Scarlet Macaw. So a really awesome bird that we're starting off with today. So the Scarlet Macaw, or Ara Macaw, is a large yellow, red, and blue neotropical parrot. That is native to the humid evergreen forests of places like in the Americas, such as southeastern Mexico to Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Bolivia, Venezuela to Brazil, from lowland to highland areas of between 500 meters to up to 1,000 meters, as well as places like Trinidad, as well as the Pacific island of Colombia, which is pretty cool. There was range kind of went a little bit more south, but they have suffered local extinction as we get into. Luckily, the icons at least concerned though. So the first described by Carl Linnaeus in 1758 as Psittacus macaw, but then they were placed in the genus Ara, which is placed with other genera of South American macaws. Two different subspecies that are described by size and color detail, with the dominant subspecies being the South American one, and then Cyandoterist, which is the North or Central American one, is kind of a little bit larger and is blue on its green wings instead of green, which is interesting. So this is kind of the one you typically think about. And there's been some little genetics to look into it, but not too much. In terms of description, these guys get to about 81 centimeters long, and which was more than half of it being that really long tail. And though it actually has a larger percentage of tail than a lot of macaws. And it weighs about 1 kilogram, so it's a very large bird, especially for parrots. It is quite large, about 2 pounds, 3 ounces. The plumage you can see is mostly scarlet or red, but the rump and tail colors tail covert feathers are light blue, with the greater white coverts being yellow, and the greater wing, as you can see there, dark blue with tails and feathers. And the underside of the wing and tail feathers, you can see dark red with a metallic gold iridescence, and some may have green, similar to the green macaw. But you can see they also have got bare white skin around the eyes from there to their bill. Tiny white feathers cover that face patch, not completely bald. And they have no yellow on their wings, in the wing. Scarlet macaws are also very loud. They make very loud, low-pitched, throaty squawks, squeaks, and screams. They can carry for kilometers in their group. And they're very long-lived. They can live up to 75 years, even 90. Even though in captivity they'll have a typical lifespan about 40 to 50. So in terms of behavior, a typical sighting can be a single bird or a pair of birds flying above a colony, though in some areas they can live in large flocks. They often gather around clay licks, and they communicate primarily through their honks and things that are quite variable, and they have been observed to be able to mimic human speech. Not quite as good as things like African greys, but they can mimic human speech. So wild macaws will feed on fruits, nuts, seeds, flowers, and nectar. They'll eat a lot more nuts and things because they've got quite powerful beaks. They will also eat things like insects and larvae. They can also be seen feeding on bugs, snails, and foliage, which is a great source of protein, especially during the breeding season. They do need that. In some areas, they've also learned to eat introduced teak trees and almond beech trees, which is quite interesting, which has been a big thing for tourism as well, but it can be an impact, for local populations trying to harvest them, but they seem to be doing okay. It's a good thing for tourism and bird watchers to see macaws and things like that. In terms of breeding, they're comparatively docile throughout most of the year. They can get quite aggressive during breeding, and they are monogamous birds, so they will remain with each other throughout their lives, with individuals remaining with one partner throughout their lives. The hen will lay about 2 to 3 white eggs in a large tree cavity, and we're going to look at the cute little babies while we talk about these guys. Wrong one. Let me forgive that. With these cute little guys. So the female will incubate that egg for about 5 weeks, and the chick fledges from the nest in about 90 days, so that's when they get their adult feathers. This is before fledging. And they leave their parents after about a year, and juveniles will reach sexual maturity at about 5 years of age, so that's when they start breeding. And then again, they can live up to 75 to 90 years in the wild, and a little bit less in captivity. Typically, their range is extensive, so it covers a lot of the Amazon rainforest, from the Andes to Bolivia. In Bolivia, they can be found in some areas like near the capital city too. Central America, they can be found in Mexico, through Panama, Honduras, all those areas. And they actually have been either escaped or deliberately been released into Florida, but there's no evidence of a population there, but there has been some introduced populations in places such as Puerto Rico. But it typically likes rainforests, open woodlands, river edges, and things like that. So the habitat of the macaw is actually considered the greatest latitudinal range of any bird in its genus. So it's got the largest kind of range, or most range in terms of latitude, as other macaws. Nonetheless, it is quite fragmented with tiny populations around the place, and the estimated wild population, while they're still considered least concern, is estimated to be between 50,000 and 500,000, or 499,999,000 individuals. And it's partly because of the pet trade and things like that, but luckily they are prohibited. You can get them in aviculture pretty well because of breeding and things like that, but sadly there's still a lot of poaching from the wild. And the northern subspecies is listed endangered, with only about 2 to 3,000 remaining in the wild, so you're most likely seeing the nominate subspecies. The scarlet macaw is also an early example of breeding in captivity for parrots, and captive breeding occurs in Mexico, where they've been using them, been uncovered and using these kind of breeding them, which is quite interesting. Though today they're found quite widely in captivity, but are best remembered to the Americas. The captive breeding has actually helped reduce the impact of wild populations, as people with extra babies from populations that are areas are low can be reared by human hands and then released into the wild. But they are quite common pets, but they can get quite imprinted, so those animals aren't released to the wild. But luckily with the help of people, they have been reintroduced into areas where they are been locally extinct. But luckily, they're still getting least concerned, doing well, and common in captivity, so not too much of a danger. But yeah, really, really cool. Great one by Lorby. We're going to have another look at another macaw, another Lorby macaw. This is done the blue and yellow macaw, so this one's probably even more famous than the scarlet. So this is the blue and yellow macaw, or blue and gold. These guys are another species of large neotropical parrot, but these guys, as you can see, the main difference there is they're mostly blue, with a light yellow-orange on their kind of stomach there, a little bit of green on the face, and they're a type of macaw. Described again, very similar to the scarlet macaw, their genus Ara, which is actually French, which is the Tupi language for Brazil. Macaw is kind of for their name, which is quite cool. And these guys get a little bit bigger, a little bit longer. These guys get to about 76 to 86 centimeters, or about 30 to 34 centimeters, and weigh between 0.9 to 1.5 kilograms. So a little bit better than the scarlet macaw, one of the larger members of their family. You see they're quite vivid in appearance, with those quite bright feathers, with that little bit of lime coloured on the head, and a lot of yellow on the bottom, where they get that in blue and yellow or blue or gold macaw. They have a black beak with feathers under their chin, and their feet are grey save for their dark talons. They have a white skin on their face with kind of these little lines on them as well. And in the wild, they could live up to 30 to 35 years, probably changing in the wild, as we mentioned, macaws lives quite long. And reach sexual maturity between 3 to 6 years old, so they can live quite a long time. And there are little variations. You get like a butterscotch underside pattern, a little bit of variety within populations, which is quite cool. But these guys still have quite a wide range. They could occur from Panama, Trinidad, Tobago, all the way down into Brazil, so they have quite a wide range. They were nearly wiped out for Trinidad in the 1970s, but luckily were introduced. So a great example of, introducing them as well. And they've been introduced to places such as Puerto Rico, and some have actually been found in Florida too, which is quite interesting. So very similar to the scarlet macaw, these guys also mate for life. And I look at the cute babies when we talk about them. These guys also will mate for life. And their nest is almost exclusively in dead palms, or most nests are in Manuria flexoria palms. The female will lay 2 to 3 eggs. The female incubates these eggs for about 28 days. One chick is dominant and gets most of the food, and the others will perish. Chicks fledge around 97 days after hatching, and the male's bird colour is actually signals their readiness of breeding, so the brighter and bolder the colours, the better the chance he will have of getting a mate. So in terms of conservation threats, they are sadly in a lot of places on the verge of extinction, especially Paraguay. I keep clicking the wrong buttons, I'm sorry guys. Let's have a look at the one up here. Have a look at one running up here, because it's fun. Oh, no. Sorry, guys. Have a look. Alright, let's have a look. Carry on. So as I mentioned, they are still widely found in places of mainland South America, but they're become extirpated in Paraguay. The population is estimated to be about 10,000 individuals and is in decline, so it is a little bit of a worry, but luckily there's trade restricted on them. There's some protection. And even though they're well known for screaming and things like that, they're quite well known for that, and large size. They can be kept in captivity. They are readily kept in captivity, but only by quite experienced aviculturists and people with large areas or large aviaries that they can fly in, which is quite cool. And possibly you should keep them in an enclosure that's at least 15 meters in length. The captain macaws, with good care and things that can live up to 60 years. And these guys may actually outlive their owners, so you've got to be careful with that. But yeah, really, really common in zoos and things like that. Really intelligent, good at training, things like that. Really, really cool bird. Another great lorby bird, great macaw. How can you not love these guys? So now we're going to be moving on from macaws, though we still have lorby. We've got the Toco toucan, which is probably the most famous of the toucans. This is the one that you think about when you think of a toucan. This is the species, the Toco toucan. So these guys are a species of toucan, and they are the largest species in the group of toucans, or Rufuspacidae. And these guys are the largest species with a distinctive appearance. You can see you got that black body, white throat, chest, and the upper tail coverts, which is quite interesting. So these guys, the oldest known remains of these guys actually are found in the Pleistocene about 20,000 years ago. And they were formerly described by Philip Ludwig Stanitz-Müller in 1776, which is quite interesting, and one of the 8 species currently in the genus Ramphantos, which is kind of is the most basic one. There's also the white-throated keelbill, the other ones that we've covered on the channel before. And there's 2 different subspecies, which is the dominant subspecies found in Guyana, Peru, and northern northeastern Brazil. The other one's found in Paraguay, eastern Brazil, northern Bolivia, and northern Argentina. Quite similar, though slightly smaller, with some other small managements. Might have even be considered different subspecies. But yeah, quite cool. As I mentioned, largest species of toucan. They get about 56 centimeters or about 22 inches long. They cannot really get mistaken for other birds because they've got that huge beak, which is like really, really huge. Their body's typically glossy black with like a bright, white throat and upper throat, which is quite cool. And sometimes there's a little bit of yellow tint to it. They've also got a white rump and a red band that meets the black breast. Their rump is white and their curasum is red. And they're very interesting colours as well. So in terms of their beak as well, they've got a very long and thin beak that is usually reddest around the top and then kind of goes orange, and it's got these orange bands on them as well as it reaches more yellowish around the back as well. They can get quite long. The beak will vary between 6.8 to 8.5 inches in male toucans and 1.5 to 202 millimeters, or about 6.2 to 8 inches in females. So males have a little bit of a bigger beak, but still really, really huge, especially for a bird of that size. So the beak looks heavy, but it's actually hollow. It's all hollow. It's basically spongy. And the tongue is nearly as long as the bill. And other than the size differences, there's not really much difference between the sexes. Juveniles are typically duller and shorter billed. The adults, they typically wear that big bill as they get bigger. And they're also quite famous for making all sorts of sounds, like grunting, croaking, snorting, and making all sorts of these fun sounds, which is quite cool. And although they can be confused with other species, their vocalizations can be confused with things like red-breasted or channel-billed toucans, though they're typically deeper because they're bigger animals, of course. So these guys are endemic to South America, meaning they can be only found there. And they have a wide distribution from the Guianas down to Uruguay and northern Argentina. In the northern part of their range, there's several distinct populations, but typically areas. There are some areas where they have gone extinct, and their range actually in the Amazon forest may be increasing due to deforestation, which is interesting. But these guys do not inhabit closed canopy rainforests. They typically prefer semi-open habitats such as gallery forests, savannas, woodlands, things like that. And even they like living around the Cerrado, which is a top of tropical savanna, and the Pantanal. So they do like a little more open areas, which want to be one of the few species actually increasing because of deforestation, which is interesting. But in terms of behavior and ecology, these guys are typically seen when flying or feeding in the treetops, hopping from branch to branch, and their flight is somewhat undulating, but they will between gliding and happy flapping. They do have large home ranges like other toucans. They can be out 86 hectares. And the most widely dispersed of these toucans, they do not cross large rivers. They cannot sustain. They can also sustain flight across water bodies up to 5 kilometers wide. They're also less active during the day and resting in the treetops. They're less gregarious than the toucans. They usually live in small groups or by themselves. And when foraging together, they fly to treetop in single file. Members of the group will breed each other. Usually ends around egg laying, and they'll actually mates will exclusively breed each other. And at the end of the breeding season, they'll form large flocks and fly around the forest searching for food. And they actually may interact with other species like the white-throated toucan. So their bill is probably the most obvious bit you can see about them. Is actually the largest, is serrated and the largest relative to body size of all birds. about 30 to 50% of their body area, though another species has a longer bill. This has the biggest bill, technically. And suggestions about why it has such a large bill includes like social selection, visual warning, imitating other birds when rubbing their nests, preening, things like that. But research has shown these guys actually have a large surface area for heat exchange, so they can modify blood flow to better control their body temperature, which is quite interesting. And they've also shown as they can radiate heat like elephant ears, but there's also, all those parts could be a part of it as well. You get multiple reasons, especially since such a big structure, it makes sense there's multiple reasons for it to evolve. But yeah, being able to control their body temperature is definitely a very important one. These guys, in terms of their diet, are frugivores, so they pretty much feed on fleshy fruits, but will eat insects, eggs, and nestlings of other smaller birds. But they usually eat the canopy. They'll fly around the canopy looking for all sorts of different types of fruits and things that are fruiting year round. That they love like high sugar food and things like that, like figs. But they'll eat all sorts of different things. But they'll also eat small insects like caterpillars and termites, or small vertebrates like lizards, birds, small birds and nestlings and things like that. They've also been known to prey on the nests of things like parrots, tyrant fish, flycatchers, puffbirds, and blackbirds, which is quite interesting. And nestlings can weigh up to about 200-300 grams, and they can actually eat them, which is quite interesting. In terms of breeding, let's have a look at the cute little babies. We'll talk about why they change so much as breeding, or how they change. So they show several changes during the nesting season. They become more solitary and secretive. Preening typically only occurs when mated pairs, and they will display to each other, like showing their outer coverts and things like that. And their large bill, for breeding, seasonal. The nesting is seasonal, but the timing of the breeding will depend on different regions. Places like the Amazonias will be in September to January. Other places like Paraguay will be September to February. Just depends on where you are. But nesting occurs occurs in cavities, usually in trees such as coral cockspurs and slash pines, but also termite mounds and stream banks, which is quite interesting. Nests, as I mentioned, they can also nest in cavities made by campo flickers and cream-backed woodpeckers, which is quite interesting. And successful breeding has also occurred in rural areas or urban areas, with a high level of disturbance can kind of lead to abandonment by the parents. And they usually breed annually in the wild, but they've sometimes reported multiple times a year in captivity. They lay between 2 to 4 eggs, which are incubated by both parents about 17 to 18 days, which after they hatch, they'll often beg for their parents with loud begging calls. Then hatchlings are initially mostly fed insects to get a lot of protein, but as they get older, they'll be fed more and more fruits. And then chicks will fledge at about 43 to 52 days after hatching. As I mentioned, they are interaction with other species. They are a species of seed disperser. So because they have large home ranges, large mouths and things like that, they can eat large fruits and spread their seeds around the forest. And though they eat mainly native stuffs, they do sometimes spread invasive species, which is quite interesting. They do act quite important seed disperser for the Madolvi tree, which the hyacinth macaw relies on. And they're also prey for all sorts of different birds, and like large birds of prey and things like monkeys, but also lots of lice and things like that. So quite an important animal in the ecosystem. So in terms of their conservation, they've got a little bit of an interesting story. They are considered least concern. They're quite, popular in pop culture. Let's see if we can find an adult and talk about them. Yeah, look at this guy. Really, really cool. Yeah, because they prefer habitat, they're actually likely to benefit from all this deforestation, which is interesting. They are considered least concern, but they are hunted for their meat and the pet trade. And there's actually studies looking to these guys. Actually, they're the second most commonly traded species between 1975 and 2018, so you can get them quite easily. But they're one of the best known birds, and being so common, and their habitat's actually, we're kind of making good habitat for them. These guys are actually doing quite well. But as I mentioned, there is quite a pet trade for these guys, so some tougher protections on that, and they should be sweet. And I know we'd love to see animals doing well under human circumstances, but we want to keep the rainforest, so maybe not too much. We love these guys, but we love other guys as well. We all need a good balance in life, But really, really cool. Lorby did a really great job with this toucan. So yeah, that's all the Lorby's mods. He did both Macaws, the Scarlet and Blue and Gold, and he also did the Toco toucan. But next up, we've got Tosco DS, who's also returned with another really cool bird. We have got the Crested Caracara. So the Crested Caracara is also known as the Mexican eagle. Let's see if we can find an adult. There we are. There's the adult Mexican eagle. These guys are a bird of prey in the falcon family, found in the southern and southeastern United States, throughout Mexico, and into Central South America. So these guys were first described in 1777. by English illustrator John Frederick Miller, who kind of found these guys, and the scientific name is kind of Caracara flantus, which means eagle, and Caracara is the Crested Caracara is in that genus. And there's two subspecies known. There's the Chihuahua one that lives up in the United States, Cuba, places like that. The more southern subspecies, Plancus, lives in like the eastern Brazil, South Europe, and the Falkland Islands. But these guys are sometimes considered different species, but now considered the same species. These guys have a total length of about 50 to 65 centimeters long and a wingspan of about 120 to 132 centimeters, or about 20 to 26 inches in length, and a wingspan of 47 to 52 inches, and weigh between 0.9 to 1.6 kilograms, or 2 to 3.5 pounds, averaging just over 1.3 kilograms, or about 2.9 pounds. The several birds have been raised like that. Individuals from these colder southern parts of the range tend to be larger than their northern parts, as part of Bergman's rule, and are the largest type of Caracara, which is quite interesting. And they are also the second largest species of falcon, second only to the griff falcon. But you can see these guys are not too bold in colours. Their caps, belly, thighs, and wings are mostly darkest brown, and their feathers are whitish blue, and then mantles and things that could be a whitish brown as well. And you can see on their face as well, they got a little bit of orange and yellow there, which is quite interesting. The legs of the bare face, you see these guys are reddish orange. The juveniles will have look like adults, but they're paler and have more pinkish purple facial skin on them, which is quite interesting. So you can see that's an adult, and you can see the baby over here is a lot more pinkish to them, which is quite cool. Let's have a look at you again. Really, really awesome. So in terms of behavior, these guys are quite bold, opportunistic raptors, and they cannot be seen walking on the ground looking for food. They mainly feed on the carcasses of dead animals, but will steal food from other raptors and raid nests from birds and reptiles, and take live prey as possible, things like small mammals, small birds, amphibians, reptiles, any kind of small invertebrates, maggots and worms, things like that, even only up to the size of a snowy egret. They will also eat fruit and are dominant over black and turkey vultures, so they're able to take food from those kind of birds. And they also pirate foods from like pelicans, ibises, and spoonbills. And they will kind of harass them until they regurgitate their food and eat it. They'll also take live prey that have been flushed out by cattle, farming equipment, or wildfire, and they've been learned to follow cars for food that people throw out, which is not a good thing. The opportunity native of the species has been seeked out these phenomena like wildfires and circling vultures, so they're quite good at taking opportunities. They are typically solitary birds, but several individuals have been seen around dumps and large food sources like big carcasses, and typically breeding takes parts in the southern hemisphere, parts of summers, in southern parts of their range, but timing is less strict in warmer regions, so they will breed. It's a little bit more casual in warmer regions. The nests are quite large though, and they typically are on the top of a tree or palm, but sometimes on the ground as well, and they have a clutch size, potentially up to 2 eggs. So, as I mentioned, they have quite a large range. They occur from southernmost South America up to the southern United States, with an isolated population on the Falkland Islands, though they do avoid areas such as the Andean highlands and dense forests like the Amazon. They can be found in most other places. There have even been reports of them living in California, San Francisco, and there's been reports of them kind of increasing. They may be moving a little bit more north with climate change, things like that. And there actually is a relic population of northern Caracaras that lived during the late glacial period in Florida, which is quite interesting. They actually survived in the prairies of central Florida and around the St. John's River, and then kind of spread out there. There's kind of an isolated population there. There's also the Texas eagle, they're also called as, and Mexico, they're kind of like a sacred animal, which is quite cool. And in terms of status, they are very common and likely to actually benefit from deforestation as well, and they are considered least concerns. They are doing quite well, and we love seeing that. A really, really cool bird, and nice to see these guys doing well. So it was done by Toco DS. Next up, we've got Monsoon. How can you not love Monsoon? Monsoon always makes really great mods, but here we've got the Pacific black duck, or like we call it in New Zealand, the grey duck. I will call it the grey duck from now on because it's what I know it as. So the grey duck, or Anis supercicola, is a dabbling duck from much of Indonesia, New Guinea, Australia, and New Zealand, and it can be found on many islands around the southwestern Pacific, and from the Caroline Islands to the French Polynesia. They're usually called the grey duck in New Zealand, and their Māori name is Pairea, I believe you say that. So the Pacific duck, it was formally described in 1789 by German naturalist Johann Friedrich Gelm in his revised example of Carl's Systematica Natura, whereas Anis Thylacoleo. And there's another one found in Dusky Sound, things like that. There's two different subspecies subscribed. There's the nominate subspecies, which is found in Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea, whereas known as the grey duck, and then the island black duck found is in Patawensis, can be found in New Guinea and southwestern Pacific Islands, which is quite interesting. In terms of these guys, not too different from other ducks. They're a sociable duck that can be on really similar habitats, and the nesting habitat is quite similar to those of the mallard that's been encroaching on their range in New Zealand and Australia. But it feeds on upending like other ducks in its genus. They have quite a dark body, you can see, with a paler head and a dark crown with a facial stripe. In flight, they have a green spectrum and a pale underwing, which is quite interesting. You can see it there. And all plumages are similar. They reach in size between 54 to 61 centimeters, with males tending to be larger than the female. And there are some island forms that are smaller and darker than other populations. A little bit of variation there. They're not resident to the Mariana Islands, but sometimes can be found there. And they're now extinct Marinara mallard. It was probably derived from hybrids between this mallard and these ducks, the grey duck, which came to the island during migration and settled there. And like their relatives like the American black duck and the mallard, the Pacific black duck is one of the number of species that can quack, and with the female producing raw disrupted quack that decreases in volume. So very cool duck. We have a few of these around. Really, really cool. I like seeing them. In terms of their breeding, these guys, we'll have a look at the baby while we talk about these guys. Really, really nice little cuties. So they typically like to breed in a hole in a tree, but sometimes the old nests of a corvid or use nests on the ground. They typically will lay of eggs about 8 to 10 pale cream eggs incubated only by the female, and then the eggs hatch at about 26 to 32 days and are precocial, so these are ducks pretty much ready to go right out the box. In downy feathers, they'll typically leave the nest site and then are cared for by the female, and they fly when they're about 58 days old. So that's they can fly, that's when they go through fledging. The Pacific black duck, in terms of feeding, is majorly vegetarian, so they feed on seeds and aquatic plants, but their diet is also supplemented by small crustaceans, mollusks, and aquatic insects. Typically, food is obtained by dabbing, where the bird will plunge its hand into the water, and upends, which raise the rear end vertically in the water, though they will actually find land in kind of damp grassy areas, which is quite cool. In terms of the conservation status, these guys have sadly actually declined quite sharply in some areas such as New Zealand and several Australian islands because of hybridization with the introduced mallard. Say the data points, they've actually scared that they might actually lose them as a species and they will just get a hybrid spawn of mallards and things like that. But it's been kind of bring down a bit. It's not quite as serious as I thought it was. It was assumed that it was far more mallard drakes or male ducks made with grey duck females than vice versa, by the fact that most hybrids have a male plumage. It just assumes that the phenotype is dominant. And the main reason for displacement is because of the larger mallards, and it has been that decline. But luckily, they have been kind of peeled back a bit and saying, oh, it's actually not as big a deal as we thought. And luckily, Australian populations and other populations have become in to supplement. So they may be not quite as in danger as we thought, but still, we don't like mallards and we don't want them in New Zealand. Where they're native to, they're fine, but, introduced species shouldn't be where they are most of the time. They're really, really cool. Really, really awesome duck. A great one by Monsoon. Monsoon always does make banger mods. Really, really awesome duck. So that's it for birds. We normally love talking about birds, but we've got here, this is actually really weird because we've got only one Great Cakes mod today, but it is a banger of a mod, as per always. We've got here the Harp seal. So the Harp seal, which is also known as the saddleback seal or the Greenland seal, these guys are a species of earless seal or true seal native to the northernmost Atlantic Ocean and Arctic Ocean. And they're originally in the genus Fonca, they're in the genus Pagophilus, and their monotypic genus, where their scientific name means ice lover from Greenland, which is pretty interesting. So mature harp seals, you can see, has pure black eyes. They have a silver-grey coating to their body with a black harp or wishbone-shaped markings dorsally, where they get their name, the harp seal. Adults typically grow between 1.7 to 2 meters, or about 5'7" to 6'7" long, and weigh about 115 to 140 kilograms, or between 254 to 309 pounds. And the babies, let's see if we can find the babies. We'll talk about the babies later. We'll talk about them when they're breeding. The babies will typically have a yellowish white coat due to the staining of the amniotic fluid, but after 1 to 3 days, they typically will turn white and then stay white for about 2 to 3 weeks until their first molt. And then adolescent harp seals typically have a silvery grey coat with spotted with black. So these guys are quite sexually dimorphic. So you can see this is a male. We'll find the female and talk about her. So this is a female here. So you can see they're quite sexually dimorphic. The males are slightly larger and more decorated. Males will average weight 135 kilograms, or just under 300 pounds, and reach up to 1.9 meters, or just over 6 foot. While females average about 120 or 260 pounds and reach just under 1.8 meters, or about just under 6 foot. So males typically have a more defined dorsal harp, the females typically just remain spotted. So the females are just more spotted. The males, you can see, have much more stronger patterns, as you can see there. Very interesting as well, in terms of diving, these guys typically dive to shallow to moderately deep depths. There's been recording of different populations that suggest these guys dive from 20 to over 500 meters, and their dives lasting about 20 minutes. Though sometimes they will dive no more than less than 50 meters. They don't need to dive too deep for most things. Lactating females actually spend 80% of their time in the water and about 20% of their time in the fast ice, weaning or near their pups. However, half the time they spend on the surface is well beyond those of their expected to recover to die. So they typically try to conserve energy while wearing her pup, doing things like that. In terms of thermoregulation, the insulation actually changes a lot over their lifetime. So the young harp seals rely on their pelt or their really thick fur from nursing all the way to the weaning age, and then this insulation of the fur depends on their being able to keep that layer of air between their hairs, and then it takes about a year for them to develop their blubber, and then their first year pelages to grow, and then they get that thick layer of blubber and get that important important blubber and things like that, like a fur, because it doesn't insulate well in water. So typically they move from having hair to blubber, and then that blubber keeps them warm. And they also have a few things like they are really cool. They have lots of behavioral and anatomical adaptations to manage their body temperature, such as elevating their metabolic rate. And also their flippers have circulatory adaptations to prevent heat loss. Also their thick coat of blubber insulates their body, and brown fat warms their body. And flippers have heat exchanges, very similar, like penguins' feet. They can put their foreflippers to their body and the hind flips together to produce heat. And they also redirect blood flow to minimize heat loss, which is quite cool. In terms of their senses, they have quite large eyes, which are large and spherical. They also have a tensor lucidum, which is like a membrane under their eyes, inside their eyes that makes them shine, like dogs and cats do. It allows them to see in low light areas, which is quite cool. They also, very interesting, have a they have a lack of tear ducts that to drain secretions from their O-rings, and that can be indication of the hydration level of the seal. On the ice, the mothers will actually identify their offspring by their smell, and by the ocean predator, they'll actually close their nostrils and disable that sense of smell. And they have lots of whiskers or brissae that allows them to feel around for things, especially in movement, things like that in the water, which is quite cool. Very similar to most species of pinnipeds, they are carnivores and have quite a diverse diet of a dozen fish and invertebrate species. Depending where you are, there's different varieties, but they will feed on things like krill, capelin, herring, flatfish, things like that, polar cod, depending on where they are, but they will eat a variety of fish and other invertebrates. Harp seals typically spend a little bit of time on land compared to at sea. They are social and quite vocal in groups. Within their large colonies, they form smaller hierarchies. The groups of several thousand can appear around, pupping and mating season. In the wild, they could live for about 30 years. And on the ice, the pups will call their mothers by yelping and mumbling, while the adults growl and things like that to warn conpacifics. And then underwater, they're actually quite vocal. They have 19 different types of vocalizations that they can use to communicate, which is quite interesting. So let's have a look at the babies because we've already had a look at the male and female. Let's have a look at the cute little baby. Look at this little guy. Anyway, the harp seals are a fast ice breeder and have believed to have a polygamous mating system. They typically breed from mid-February to April, and courtship peaks mid-March and includes males performing lots of displays, using bubbles, vocalizations, and paw movements to court the females. And females who will remain on the ice will resist copulation until they're underwater. So females mature sexually between 5 and 6, and annually they may bear one pup a year, usually during late February. Gestation period is typically about 11.5 months, with a development fetal phase about 8 months. This has been repeated cases of twin births, but singletons are mostly more common. The fertilized egg will actually grow in the embryo and be suspended in the womb for up to 3 months before being implanted to delay birth until there's sufficient pack ice to, actually have babies. Harp seals' births are quite rapid. They typically give birth in as short as 15 seconds reported. In order to cope with a shock and random change of environment, the pup actually relies on solar heating and behavioral things to seek warmth, even in the shade, because, going from the warm womb of their mother into the cold Arctic is going to be a pretty big jump. But yeah, Newborn pups typically weigh about 11 kilograms, or about 24 pounds on average, and about 80 to 85 centimeters in length. And after birth, the female will only feed her pup, feeds only on her pup, only her pup. And then during the approximately 12-day long nursing period, the mother does not hunt and will lose up to 3 kilograms a day. Harp seal milk initially contains 25% fat, and then the number increases to 40% as the mother fasts. And the pup will gain about 2.2 kilograms per day, which quickly thickens up their blubber layer. And during this time, the female's grey coat grows beneath the white neonatal coat. The baby's coat grows under the grey coat, grows under the white coat. And then they'll increase their weight up to about 36 kilograms. And weaning is quite abrupt, with the mother turns from nursing to promiscuously mating. That just leaves the pup in the ice. And then while courtship is on the ice, males will take their place in the winter and the water. And after abandonment in the post-weaning phase, the pups will become sedentary to conserve body fat. Then within a few days, they'll shed their coat, reaching a beta stage. And kind of this name comes from the sound of a beta tail, where they kind of learn to swim. Pups begin to feed at about 4 weeks, and they're still drawn on internal sources of heat, relying on the energy stored on the body core rather than blubber. And during this time, this leaves them the most vulnerable to polar bears and other predators, and then this fast can reduce their weight up to 50%, and up to 30% of pups sadly die in their first year because of the easy mobility, quite early mobility on land. So about 13 to 14 months old, the pups molt again, becoming bed lamers, and the juveniles molt several times, producing that spotted harp's kind of seal look, with the male adults' harp pelt actually fully emerge after several years, but in females it does not. And then they converge annually on the ice to molt, pup, and breed before migrating to summer feeding grounds, and they'll do this, and they can live for over 30 years, so they just keep repeating that cycle over and over again. Okay, so their population is estimated to be about 4.5 million. The number of pups traditionally around the areas have been estimated around only 18,300 because of people. But because of their dependence on pack ice for breeding, they've been restricted to areas where ice forms seasonally. And some of the areas, they prefer largest located in Eastern Canada, like the Gulf of St. Lawrence and Newfoundland. There's a lot of ice there that they can breed, but they typically will breed on anywhere where there's pack ice. In terms of migratory, they are very strongly migratory, and the northwest populations will readily migrate or move up to 4,000 kilometers for the breeding season, with individual located in the North Norwegian coast, which is just 4,600 kilometers away in the east-northeast of their location. And they've actually been spotted in locations such as the Great Britain, with a total of 31 vagrants recruited between 1800 and 1988 in the UK, which is quite funny. And more recently, they've been found in the Shetland Islands, all sorts of really interesting places, the Atlantic coasts. They have been found in North Carolina, but it's typically because they're sick due to dehydration or paradise load. They can, not parasite load, not paradise load. They can get quite sick and found there, and there luckily are several centres to help them and then help release them back into the wild, which is quite cool. And as we mentioned, seal hunting was quite a big issue. Commercial hunting is allowed from November 15th to May 15th, since these guys are so common. It used to be not quite as much as it was, and you weren't allowed to do it, and there's regulations about it now to try and keep it sustainable. But these guys, it obviously wasn't in the future. But their population is greatly affected by humans. So over the past 50 years, the population has fluctuated from over 9 million to as little as 1 million. And the population as of 2019 is estimated to be about 7.6 million. So we're luckily probably about at the same what it used to be before humans kind of got rid of them past 150 years ago. But sadly, with climate change, with that pack ice becoming less common, it may have another impact on their populations. But luckily there is sustainable harvesting and effort on climate change to help these guys. But yeah, really, really cool. How can you not love a good harp seal? Definitely a big fan of these guys. So that's a Great Cakes mod, another great one from Great Cakes. So last but certainly not least, we've got an extinct animal by Leaf and your old friend TNT. How can you not love TNT? We have got Thylacoleo, everyone's favourite marsupial lion. So really, really cool. Is that an adult? Yeah, that's the adult. Let's have a look at that. Let's look at you guys. How beautiful. So Thylacoleo, which means pouch lion, is an extinct carnivorous marsupial that lived in Australia from the late Pliocene to late Pleistocene, so about 40 million years ago, known as marsupial lions. They were the largest and the last members of the family Thylacoleidae, which were considered almost apex predators like the lions and leopards of Australian ecosystems, because there were no cats there what took their place was these large carnivorous marsupials like Thylacoleo. The largest species and the latest species, Thylacoleo carnifex, was about the weight of a lioness and was estimated to be about 101 to 130 kilograms, or about 223 to 287 pounds. So as I mentioned, they were first described in 1859 as the first species, Thylacoleo carnifex, which was the type species, and there have been a few other species described that were older. So there's Hilli, which was found in the Pliocene, which was half the size of the other species that lived during the Pliocene. Carnalicylidens, which lived 5 million years ago, was the size of a large dog. And then the latest and greatest species was the Thylacoleo carnifex, which lived till the end of the Ice Age, about 40,000 years ago. So in terms of who these guys are related to, these guys are in the order Diprotodontia, which includes many other well-known species such as kangaroos, possums, and koalas. In their own family, there's about 3 genera and 11 species of marsupial lions, quote-unquote, used, with other species and genera, things like Wakaleo and Microleo. So these guys, there was a lot of debate where they actually fit in the family tree, but they are kind of stem wombat, you could say. And these guys were quite diverse and lived in all sorts of different things, ranges and ecological niches not taken by other mammals. So these marsupials were quite diverse up until the end of the Ice Age, where they became extinct. So as the evolution, these ancestors would have been herbivores, which is quite interesting, which is something unusual for carnivores. So these guys would have taken that large predator niche, and as I mentioned, they're a member of the Wombatiformes, so they're only living relatives of things like koalas and wombats, which are all herbivores today. But as we know through their evolution, they would have gotten to would have been small possum-like animals and grow up to be leopard and eventually lion-sized animals like Thylacoleo carnifex, which is the size of a lioness. And these guys would have been quite good climbers as well, but still predators. Their molars and how their teeth was very similar to things like wombats and things like that, but adapted for eating meat, which is really interesting. Like their big premolar, as we get into. So the Thylacoleo carnifex is the largest carnivorous mammal known to exist, and one of the largest metatherian carnivores known. It's comparable to Thykosmilus and hyena. The individuals range from about 75 centimeters, about 30 inches in height, and about 150 centimeters, or 59 inches from head to tail. Measurements show that they get about 101 to 130 kilograms. The individuals have been estimated to be about 124 to 160 kilograms, or between 270 to 350 pounds, which is quite interesting. They're comparable in size to female lions and tigers, so quite big. But very interesting as well, the very interesting skull. They have large kind of big premolars that function as carnassial teeth in carnivorans that allow them to cut meat and really break into things. These guys would have had quite a strong bite force. They actually suggested pound for pound to have the strongest bite force of any extinct or living mammal, with a bite force of about a carnifex about 100 kilos would have the bite force comparable of a 250 kilo African lion, and actually was well adapted for hunting prey much larger than itself. So they would have been able to take on things like giant kangaroos and Diprotodon. And these guys, there was scenes improbable these guys would have a high bite force as a lion twice their size. They did manage it because they have a much larger and bulkier skulls, and also they don't have quite as large brains. Because they didn't need such a bigger brain, or didn't have such a bigger brain, there was more space in there for muscles that allowed them to bite things. And which is quite cool. But yeah, these guys would have a quite powerful bite force. These guys were really well adapted, strong bite force. As I mentioned, the strongest bite force pound for pound for any living or extinct mammal, which is quite interesting. And using 3D model things like that, they're actually found to be unable to use the suffocating kind of prolonged biting strategy or hunting strategy that modern big cats use. But they would have actually used a unique kind of way of hunting, where they would have used their incisors to grab a piece of flesh, and the carnassials would crush the windpipe and spinal cords and other major arteries. And it may not take them long to kill anything, since compared to an African lion that takes about 15 minutes to kill something on average, these guys would have killed a large animal in less than a minute, so they were well-efficient predators. And it seems they're very similar to things like Smilodon. They were so well adapted for big game. They were not very good at catching small animals, which could have led to their extinction, similar to Smilodon, which we'll get into. As we mentioned as well, postcranium, these guys have highly mobile forelimbs. As we mentioned, they are descended from animals that are arboreal and were arboreal themselves. So you can see they have a very large retractable hooked claws and a large semi-opposable thumb, which had been suggested to hold down prey and help them climb as well, which is quite cool. Also, the hind feet has 4 functional toes, with the first digit being reduced in size, but is possessing a roughened pad similar to that of possums, very similar for climbing. So they would have been able to climb very similar to other types of diprotodonts and things like that. And its strong forelimbs and retracting claws, so their claws could retract very much like a cat. So these guys would have been able to pretty much climb trees, and it is thought to have climbed trees and carry carcasses up into trees, very much like leopards would today. The climbing ability would have helped them to climb out of caves, which also could have used them as dens to breed their young. They also have specialized tail bones called chevrons that actually strengthen the tail, which would have allowed them to prop them up while rearing on their hind legs, which they may have done when attacking or climbing. So these guys would have been quite good. But also their lumbar region was actually quite stiff and straight, suggesting that these guys didn't have quite a lower back, and they're probably more adapted for ambushing rather than chasing down prey, because a lot of animals that are pursuit predators, that are mammals, have quite flexible lumbars that allow them to chase prey. So in terms of their diet, these guys were most thought to be carnivores. Pretty obvious they were a carnivore, though there was some disagreements. They were suggested they were herbivore, but most recent evidence suggests they were carnivore. They were most often thought to be, an active predator, filling a similar niche to hyenas, and even sometimes suggested as a melon eater. But most proportions suggest that these guys would have been large predators in the ecosystem. They also would have been able to climb rock faces. There's trace fossils of them climbing over rocks and things like that. And they were thought to hunt large animals like Diprotodon and things like that, and then it would have competed with animals such as Megalania, giant monitor lizard, and terrestrial crocodiles such as Quicklania, Quinicana, I believe they actually say that. And these guys would have been potentially as well opportunistic scavengers, like most predators always are. But these guys would have been eating quite large prey. In terms of their feeding behavior, it's been a lot of debate on that academically, with not really a thread of analog, but they've been theorized to be a powerful hunter, which is a slow runner, being probably walking and trotting rather than climbing, but they seem to be likely an ambush predator, maybe very larger analog to suggested to the Tasmanian devil, but new evidence suggests they were arboreal or capable of climbing trees, so maybe have ecology similar to like a Tasmanian devil crossed with a leopard, we really don't know. And incisions on bones such as Macropus titan and general formality of Thylacoleo actually suggests that it fed very similar to modern cheetahs, using their sharp teeth to slice open the rib cage of prey and then get their internal organs. That's another really interesting thing. It's just a hodgepodge of many different animals into one, which is quite cool. So in terms of its paleoecology, these guys were found mostly across Australia, with a large portion of them being found in the southern third, or with scrubland, open woodland habitats, and things like that, and coexisted with all sorts of prehistoric marsupials, things like Protodon, giant wombat Protodon, giant wallabies, giant snakes, the thunderbird Geostornis, and other things like that. And these guys would have been prey. A lot of these guys would have been prey for these guys. But they were not particularly well suited for smaller prey, and this is likely because of humans that caused their extinction. Because of both climate change, Australia got much drier about 50,000 years ago, and that's when humans came around and started to burn things, which could have led as well to the drying of Australia. Lots of things. It's very much, as I mentioned as well, I've mentioned with other animals like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers, or saber-toothed cats and things like that. A lot of those, the Pleistocene or Quaternary mass extinction is hotly debated. Yeah, these guys went extinct around 40,000 years ago with the vast majority of Australian megafauna, and it was kind of the first to go extinct. It's believed to be both potentially because of either or and ancient Australians, so early Aborigines, and climate change, which all could have contributed in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, quite cool. We do have a lot of interesting discoveries. It was first discovered in the 1830s in the Wellington Valley near New South Wales, and there has been a lot more specimens found. And we do have some complete fossils now, and really, really cool. So quite well known. A really awesome animal. Love seeing Thylacoleo. Very, very cool. So let's have a look at the cute little babies, though. So very much like other marsupials, they would have had a pouch. Babies would have been born on that pouch, born a really small lid in that pouch until their mother was big enough to... Well, they were big enough to go out and hunt for themselves. So really, really cute. Thylacoleo is just a really interesting animal. How can I love these guys? And TNT always does a wonderful job. Really great way of renditioning this interesting animal. And pretty perfect. So, yeah. I think this is a great way to end the episode. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and hope you guys, thank all the modders and stuff like that, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get that little bell icon to get notified of learning things. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.